Hi everyone, and welcome to this discussion, which, well, as I said, it's basically a series of discussion on emerging technologies in cities. And we are starting by this first discussion on urban inequality. Just to give you the agenda of this session, we will start by welcoming you, and I will then hand over to my supervisor, Shin Koseki, which is here, who will present the chair and what we are doing. And then we will get in depth in the discussion through different topics on definition of the concepts, what are the implications of digital technologies in cities, and also what are the different options of measure that we can explore to address the issue of digital inequalities. So the discussion will be, we designed the discussion to be very engaging, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts and comments through the chat and the Q&A. Will be placed to answer. We'll also give the floor during the discussion to some of you to raise insights or give comments regarding to the discussion. As I said, the discussion will be interactive, so we have designed a platform for you to engage during the discussion and then also react through emojis and those kind of things. So yeah. So now, as we are starting, I will hand over to Shin Koseki to introduce the chair and what we are doing, and then we'll go to the discussion. So over to you, Shin.
Great, thanks a lot. Hi, my name is Shin Koseki. I'm an assistant professor of urban theory and design at the University of Montreal. I'm also the holder of the UNESCO Chair in urban landscape. And we're really proud to host and promote this first episode of Insight Into, which is a great idea from Leandri Giussa, who just made this introduction. So the UNESCO Chair in Urban Landscape, we are a research group based out of the University of Montreal. We work mostly on social, ecological, and technological transition in the city. We've worked extensively on questions of governing and using AI in urban contexts, as well as on the ecological transition of large rivers in cities. So for the last 20 years, the UNESCO Chair has run a series of projects, including the What UNESCO, the workshop Atelier Terrain UNESCO, which are a set of international workshops we do in partnership with different cities in the world, and with international organizations such as UNESCO and UN Habitats. This was just briefly a quick introduction of the chair. Of course, we're also very happy to welcome Ruth Nelson and Pontus Westerberg for this first edition. And I return the mic to you, Leandri, if you're ready.
Thanks a lot, Shin Koseki. Sorry, guys, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Leandri. I'm a PhD researcher here in the UNESCO Chair in Urban Landscape at Montreal University. It's my pleasure again to welcome you here for this first discussion. So the first topic of our discussion is on emerging technology and urban inequality and inequalities. And for this discussion, we welcome two very inspirational speakers. The first one is Pontus Westerberg, who is the head of the UN Habitat's People-Centered Smart City Flagship program. And Pontus leads the Flagship, and he has advised governments on digital inclusion, civic technologies, smart cities, and urban innovation in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. He represents the UN Habitat in the steering group of the Cities for Digital Rights Coalition, the UN Working Group on Artificial Intelligence, the advisory group of the Finnish Estonia Smart Cities Center. He is a co-founder of the UN Innovation Technology Accelerator for Cities and the Block by Block Foundation. Before joining the UN in 2012, he worked in the NGO sector for 10 years. So he has quite a lot of things done. And we have the Ruth Nelson, who is a PhD researcher at TU Delft. Ruth is an architect and spatial data scientist and is currently working as an interdisciplinary PhD researcher in the Center of for urban science and policy at TU Delft in the Netherlands. She possesses both a master's in architecture at Nelson Mandela University and in space syntax at the University College of London. Her research practice focuses on understanding and addressing the processes that shape and reproduce urban inequality through complex network analysis, spatial data science, and mixed methods. She has worked in corporate consulting and research roles in South Africa, the UK, Mexico, the Netherlands, and has several affiliations with TU Delft in the Netherlands, Urban AI in France, the local government information unit in UK, and the Young Urbanists in South Africa. So we are pleased to welcome you guys, and it will be a very exciting discussion. And for the audience, I'm also, for logistic purpose, I'm also inviting you, if you want to interact through the session, you can use the Q&A to raise your question, or the chat to make comments, or you can also join the session that, as it will be very interactive, through this platform by scanning the QR code, or use the link that my colleague Adib will share in the chat. So yeah, so you can connect yourself, just scan the QR code with your phone. I know maybe if you are using the phone to engage with us, you can also use the link that will be shared in the chat. So now and before we dive into the intricate world of urban inequality in the digital age, let's start by exploring a fundamental question. What do we mean exactly by emerging technologies? The emerging are always emerging. Why now we are emphasizing this? And Pontus will provide us valuable insights into this concept, outlining its unique characteristic compared to other technologies. So now I will hand over to Pontus to try to give us an answer. So Pontus, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Leandri. Thanks, Shin. Thanks for inviting me. Really great to be here. It's an interesting kind of new format to me. I really like that you chose emerging technology, the term, because it feels like sometimes in these technology discussions we are talking always about digitalization as something new, but actually going back to cybernetics in the 1950s and 60s. Digitalization has been with us for a very, very long time. And if we talk in the public sector, in local governments, for example, we have digital tools being there for 25, 30 years. And I think part of our struggle with technology is that we have all these legacy systems, all these old, really bad digital platforms to whatever it is, book travel or save documents or share documents or whatever. So digitalization has been with us for a really, really long time. But here we're talking about emerging technology, which I take then to mean stuff that is new. Sometimes we talk about frontier technologies, and it's stuff like nanotechnology and blockchain, etc. Here I picked up three that I think are particularly interesting for cities or for urban development. The first one that we talk about a lot is, of course, artificial intelligence, AI. It's a really broad concept. Some of maybe what's called AI is not particularly intelligent, but maybe fairly basic algorithms to search through large amounts of data. But still, I think that AI has a lot of potential to change the way that cities and local governments operate. And we see some interesting examples of cities using this technology for all sorts of things, ranging from planning to managing public administration. The other one I picked out was virtual and augmented reality. I think we're not quite there yet, but definitely virtual reality and augmented. I mean, virtual is when you're in a virtual world, and augmented is when you're taking digital content, let's say, out of the digital world and you're placing it in the physical environment. Putting those together, we end up with something we call mixed reality. I think that has a lot of, it's going to come. We're probably not quite there yet, but say 10, 15, 20 years from now, I can imagine that a lot of the physical infrastructure that we currently see in cities street lights, this kind of thing might be replaced by digital replicas. And the third thing, which is on the big one here on the screen, is digital twins, and that's also been talked a lot about. Put together AI, put together 3D modeling, virtual reality, and augmented reality, and you start getting a really interesting kind of new approach to urban development. It can be used for all sorts of things, like, of course, modeling when it comes to architecture, but also scenario planning around disasters or climate change. Before I move on, I just want to highlight one really important thing. If we're now moving into a kind of virtual world, metaverse, cityverse, there are different terms being bandied about. The issue of governance becomes really important. Who is going to set the rules for this new digital world? I personally don't think it should be Facebook or Tesla, but rather something that we should do together, and that requires real focus on governance. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pontus. We understand that the issue of governance is very important, so we end with that, and then we will now try to understand the second concept of this discussion, which is urban inequality. So I will continue our exploration of urban challenge in the digital age. We now turn our attention to that question. What do we mean by urban inequalities? Is this something tangible or just like something, a dream? So Ruth will tell us more about that, and I now hand over to her. So Ruth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here today. So we can just begin with the next slide. I'm just going to give you a brief context to urban inequalities and a brief overview. Urban inequalities, unfortunately, have grown within almost every single country in the world over the last 30 years. However, reducing inequalities is widely acknowledged by organizations such as the United Nations as imperative for working towards sustainable development, decreasing sort of polarization, reducing overall levels of poverty in society. Next, please. Thanks, Leandri. But inequalities have primarily sort of been defined up until this point. Only recently, it's primarily been defined as an economic issue. And only recently are we starting to understand that it actually covers many more dimensions than just income and wealth. So traditionally, metrics such as the Gini index and Atkinson index have been used by governments and organizations to measure income inequalities. But what we're learning is through recent research by myself and others in my colleagues, and others in the field, is that urban inequalities actually manifest across many dimensions, such as, for example, housing inequalities, whether or not a person has access to a home or home ownership or access to social housing. Energy inequalities is another thing that manifests across urban space, such as whether or not you can afford your gas bill or you have the infrastructure in your neighborhood to get a reliable energy source. Another facet of urban inequalities are transportation inequalities. So that relates to things like, can you access efficient and affordable public transportation? Can you walk safely around your neighborhood? Can you get on a bike and get to where you need to go? As well as, of course, digital inequalities, which relate to things like, do you have access to Wi-Fi, for example? Next, please, Leandri. And so as researchers, and we can actually look at inequalities through three sort of main lenses. The first is urban inequalities through an accessibility lens. So that's looking at who has access to what in cities, such as access to educational and social resources. We can also look at urban inequalities through a geography of distribution lens. So that more looks at the distribution of specific phenomena in cities, such as population groups or home ownership. The third sort of lens we can look at urban inequalities from is a policy and stakeholder lens. So we can focus on the kind of study of specific policies, their specific effects, how this affects specific stakeholders, who benefits, who loses out. So those are three kind of different ways we can look at urban inequalities. And from this brief introduction, I'm sure that you can understand that there are many different interacting components which feed into urban inequalities over time. So it's quite a difficult phenomena to study as a researcher because it's not a linear, cause and effect problem, one thing equals the other, but there are many different interacting components that can lead to the emergence of inequalities over time. And I think it's also very important to note that when trying to address urban inequalities, there are always sort of going to be trade-offs. We're never going to have a sort of perfect solution that addresses absolutely everything. Yeah. And then finally, the next slide, I'm just going to briefly present to you a sort of a framework that we use, my colleagues and myself, to sort of understand urban inequalities within cities. On the one side, it's sort of an abstraction of cities, let's say. On the one side, you have the social components, which would be the individual, community organizations, the private sector, governments. And on the other side, you have critical infrastructure components, such as ecological infrastructure, transportation, urban infrastructure, material and energy flows, such as electricity lines, and digital infrastructure. And the social components, on the one hand, shape infrastructure through policy and private investment and community action. But over time, the distribution and the access to this critical infrastructure actually has an effect on society again. And in this way, urban inequalities are reproduced over space and time through this sort of cyclical feedback loop type relationship. So yes, that's a very brief introduction to this complex topic.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ruth. We understand that the aspect of urban inequalities, they are very complex and involving many different aspects, and we can address it like in a linear way. We have to take into account all those different components. So I forgot to mention that during this session, we have a live illustrator, Ashton, who is she's with us. I hope she can understand and see everything because she's basically drawing and record everything through a fresco. So Ashton, don't hesitate to share your drawings with us while we are speaking. Yeah, I think it's also a good way to engage the audience and then raise maybe some main issue that we are discussing. So Ashton, so anytime when you're ready, yeah. So, okay, perfect. Then let's move to the next part. I mean, to conclude this first part, the introduction part of the introductory section of our discussion, we now want to hear from the audience. I know you are almost 30 with us now, so let's use the QR code here or the link to join the discussion if you have any comments. The question is basically, as we have defined the notion of emerging technology and also urban inequality, so we want to know now what are the linkages between those two concepts. For you here with us now, how for you emerging technology influencing urban inequality, and why you are, I mean, basically share your thoughts on that through the QR code. You can just scan it or use the link that my colleague just shared through the chat. While you are preparing your answer, I will now hand over to Pontus to give maybe a kind of first insights on for you how those emerging technology that you have presented, AI, VR, and yeah, all those stuff, also are influencing urban inequality in our urban landscape. So, Pontus.
Ruth, thank you. That was a really good overview over on urban inequality, and it made me think. If I think back when I started my career, like 15, 20 years ago or something like that, I was really optimistic about the role of digitalization, digital technology to kind of overcome inequalities. Probably naively so, thinking back. But if we go back to like 2005 or 2008, there was a lot of this kind of techno optimism around, if everyone has access to tech and everyone can share information equally, then a lot of the old inequalities will disappear, and there was perhaps belief in open data and all this kind of stuff. And I think now we realize that digital is another space where inequalities are being manifested. So instead of solving our problems, it kind of created more problems in a sense, because now we also need to consider the digital divide, and we need to think about how we also get more equality within the digital space itself. And all of these things come together, of course. I saw, Shin, that you put in the chat here that capacity is key. I think that's absolutely true. I think the digital divide now in many places is less about, let's say, access to broadband or even affordability. It's more about what you can do with it. I mean, of course, we still have some access problems, and in parts of the world, like in the US, for example, broadband is very expensive, but still it's becoming more and more about what you actually can do with the technology. And I think this becomes even more important when AI comes really in the next few years, and some jobs start disappearing, and the real jobs are going to be in engineering and designing the AI robots, when it takes all the other jobs, in a sense.
So thank you. And Ruth, anything to add?
Yeah, I think these are really important points, and something which I think we'll probably touch on again later. But I think this issue of actually having the skills to interact with the digital world is really, really important. As you said, it's not just an access issue. But I think this is very much intertwined with open inequalities too, because if you look at, for example, the makeup of local neighborhoods, this tends to influence, for example, people's education opportunities, which has, I think, a big impact on people's ability to engage with the digital world. So I think it's very interesting when, I come very much from just studying purely urban inequalities, but I think it's interesting to look at these intersections of where people live, what educational opportunities do they have access to, how does this then influence their ability to interact with the digital world, and what are those relationships?
Yeah. So thanks a lot, and thanks also for the different participants that are, engaging through the Hashtag platform. I will just maybe pick one, and then I don't know who, provide the comments, but it could be good also to hear from you guys online. So if you can just raise your hand when I read the comment, and then if you want to highlight or comment on what you have said, you will be welcome. So I see, Nanan, as much as there has been improved security, crime rates have equally increased in case where the criminal has much more advanced technology. I don't know. Yeah, that's the good one. But another one, lot of promotion even happening within the city are now made me advise on social media and my target specific kind of breakthrough. Take as always an answer, but sometimes it helps mitigate complex inequality, such as remote access to food in Yukon and the North Amazon shipping. They are all around positive and negative effect. The second part of the discussion, and you will try to characterize and measure those kind of inequality. Ruth and Pontus already gave a good overview. So now let's go in depth and then try to explore those different aspects. And then I will now hand over to Pontus again, and to try to give us a brief answer on this question. For you, Pontus, what are they social or spatial manifestation of those inequalities? I know you have already highlighted some of them, so could you please elaborate more on that? Is it visible in terms of space, or in terms of social? Are there some social group that are more involved in this issue of inequality or not? And yeah, I will not answer the question, so the floor is yours to give us an understanding. Thank you.
Thanks, Leandri. So I think traditionally when we've been talking about what's often called the digital divide, it's it's in general been talked about in terms of digital divide between countries, often north and south, with some countries have a better access, more access to technology, etc., and a divide between urban, rural. And while those divides are definitely still there and important, as we now move away from the digital divide, as I said, just being considered kind of access to what we might be called meaningful access. So the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, they've changed the way they talk about the digital divide from access to meaningful access, and meaningful access being much broader than just having a connection. It's about being able to use it, having the right kind of education, having the right kind of devices, the right kind of speed and all of this kind of stuff. And when we get into that, we realize that there's a lot of inequality also within our cities. A couple of years ago, New York City put out a city broadband plan, and I always remember a really striking stat from that 20%, so 1.5 million people in New York City, which is one of the most advanced cities in the world, don't have access to don't have broadband at home or on their mobile. And so definitely, and our research at UN Habitat also shows this, that these inequalities are spatial. So people that live in affluent neighborhoods have more devices, faster connections, better education to use the internet, to create with the internet, etc., of course, than people who live in informal settlements or less affluent neighborhoods. So it's really important that city policymakers put in place programs to overcome this, and there are some really good examples. Community broadband, providing skills training and access to devices in libraries and community centers, etc., etc. But these are services that local governments increasingly need to provide.
Yeah, that's a good point, because in many cities we are now talking about 5G. And 5G really related to the aspect of autonomous vehicle, for instance. And here at the chair, we are working on the project on that. And we are saying that though this 5G is mostly in the city center, for example, it's an issue. Like, for example, if you have an ambulance which working in the city center related to autonomous ambulance working in the city center related to the 5G network, and you don't have this kind of 5G in suburb, in peripheral area, it will be an issue, for example, to get to get you to an hospital if you have an emergency. So this is kind of another spatial aspect of this inequality. We will now try and maybe with Ruth, who is an expert on this aspect of inequality, and try to understand what are the factors that are underlining those inequality. Are they kind of causality or specific aspect that we need to focus on when we are talking about when we want to understand or characterize those kind of inequalities? So Ruth, let us know.
Yeah, so I think there are many factors, and it'll probably differ by context. So I've just tried to kind of group some of these underlying factors. There's going to be 3 slides with kind of 3 groups, which I'm going to present to you now. I think the first kind of factor is opportunities to engage and access to digital, to the digital, essentially. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, that this is really influenced, for example, by neighborhood composition, where you live, the local area within which you live, because this will influence sort of the digital infrastructure you have access to, but it will also probably influence your educational employment opportunities too. Your educational opportunities will probably influence your online behavior and abilities to engage with the digital. And of course, your employment opportunities will influence your income level, which will influence your ability to actually purchase software and technology. The next kind of major factor, if you could go to the next slide, thanks, I think is the design of technology and the private sector. So I think how technology is designed and represents users and places is really, really important. So for example, if technology is not designed, or an interface is not designed in your language, that's going to limit your ability to interact with with the digital. UX, of course, is also very important in taking into account demographic differences in users. So for example, if I'm colorblind and I'm using a digital technology that doesn't cater for my colorblindness, that's going to limit my ability. I think another huge factor is really representation and missing data. So the digital in many ways actually represents the physical, but it does so often in an unequal sort of manner. Certain places, certain people are represented more than others. So for example, let's just take Wikipedia. It might have much more complete information on a city in such as New York versus a rural village in India. And then I also think that the power of big tech and investment also plays a big role. So companies that are in Silicon Valley tend to get a lot of investment, such as Amazon, which enables them to grow. And local businesses in other areas are just simply often not able to compete with the resources of a big tech company like Amazon. So I think there's inequalities there too. And I just wanted to also highlight a program which sort of emphasizes some of these inequalities. It's the Facebook's Free Basic program. It was a program to basically give digital internet access to people who didn't have it, but essentially they identified, the Global Voices report identifies a number of weaknesses in the service. So it didn't basically serve the linguistic needs of specific populations. It only gave limited access to specific websites. And Facebook was also collecting a lot of metadata from these people. So I think that's an interesting way that big tech can also potentially shape these inequalities. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about is the role of, if you could go to the next slide, is the role of policies and governance, because I think this is also very important when we're talking about the intersection between urban and sort of digital technologies, emerging technologies. Policies are really, really important. So for example, Amsterdam and Helsinki have open AI registers where they are transparent about the AI algorithms that they're using in government. And a lot of governments are not transparent about their AI algorithms. I think frameworks are really, really important. Thinking about how is digital technology going to be deployed, who's going to maintain it, where do humans come in the loop when we're deploying this, especially for public use. Regulation is imperative. Thinking about protecting the privacy of citizens and human rights, essentially. And I think I just wanted to give an example of a specific sort of approach. In Sierra Leone, there's the Digitization for All strategy. And essentially, this is a program in conjunction with the government of Sierra Leone, the International Telecommunication Union, and the United Nations Children's Fund. They've actually been collaborating to provide internet access to a number of schools across the country. And I think this is an interesting example of a specific approach towards digital transformation that a country has taken, and with the aim of uplifting children, but also potentially whole communities through this initiative. So yes, those are some of the factors which I think.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for raising the aspect of policies and governance. I think it is really important, and also I think, as you have mentioned, the transparency in AI algorithm. I think it's also important to know how to get people involved, because AI is like kind of black box. So how to get people aware of that, because it's a kind of really technical issue, but we should like through policy and this governance mechanism find a way to like make it open to everyone. So before we move, we will now move to the next part of the last part of this second part of our discussion, and we will try to. I think we have. Before we move there, I will just someone said that he or she wasn't able to speak. So be ready. We will have a second interactive session where we will be able to raise your hand, raise issue, question, and don't hesitate through the chat to share your comments. And we will give the floor at the end to the audience to like speak and give also some insight. So now, before we move to the last part of our discussion, we will make a focus on a specific example. I think Ruth will bring us to the Netherlands, and then to see concretely how, I mean, the manifestation of this inequality in the real world through a concrete example. So Ruth, let's get to your plane and then go to Netherlands with you.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so I thought, since you asked me to give an example, I thought this was an interesting example. It's the childcare scandal in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of this, but if you're a resident in the Netherlands, you get childcare benefits, regardless if you're Dutch or you're non-native Dutch. And essentially between 2005 and 2019, authorities wrongly accused an estimated 26,000 parents of making fraudulent benefit claims. And it was found that the government employed, the tax authorities employed an algorithm, an AI algorithm, which was biased. And it used foreign sounding names and dual nationality as indicators of potential fraud. And this actually had incredible consequences for these people. Many of them had to pay the childcare benefits back, and it's extremely expensive to actually put your children into kindergarten in the Netherlands. So this was a big issue. Many of them lost their homes in this scandal, and actually around 1,000 children actually were taken away from parents. So, I mean, these facts alone are quite shocking, but the next slide is a little bit from my own research to kind of really give you context into sort of the multiple inequalities that would surround someone who is non-native Dutch in the Netherlands. Essentially, I've studied Rotterdam and looked at different neighborhoods over time with different characteristics, social spatial characteristics, really focusing on housing inequalities. And I used an unsupervised machine learning algorithm to kind of classify these different neighborhoods. And what I found is that different neighborhoods are generally predominantly sort of Dutch or generally predominantly sort of non-native Dutch, and that there's been increasing polarization in Rotterdam, which is a city in the Netherlands, over time. And what I found is that the non-native Dutch neighborhoods tend to have less levels of home ownership. They tend to be more renters, homes of less value, lower incomes. So what this kind of study does is it gives us context into the life of someone who is non-native Dutch in Rotterdam. So they're probably already disadvantaged. They don't have the financial resources of a native Dutch person, probably don't have command of the language that a native Dutch person has. So one could kind of start to understand why this these claims went on for so long. They did not have the financial resources to fight the government. So I think it's interesting when we actually look at the broader sort of urban inequalities which surround specific groups and this sort of digital sort of inequality that emerged and how they sort of interact to lead to the perpetuation of further inequalities. And this is an example from the Netherlands, of course.
Yeah. Sure. Thanks a lot for that. I know we mentioned the aspect of people, how to engage people, how to design technology with fit the people needs. I know Pontus, who is here with us, is working a lot on that aspect at UN Habitat. He's leading an entire flagship on that. And we want to hear from you, Pontus, and like, how can we can the people-centered approach that you are advocating or working on that can serve as a framework to address or reduce this kind of inequality that you are talking about?
Thanks, Leandro. Yeah, so we've kind of put forward what we call people-centered smart cities a little bit as a way to attempt to shift the debate away from the maybe more traditional smart city approach, which is very much about top-down application of technology, with this kind of theory of the the mayor or the urban planner as gods that can control everything that is happening in the city with AI and VR and some of those technologies that I showed at the beginning. And starting with people. It's a bit catchy, people-centered smart cities, but essentially what we mean by it is that every investment by a city or every use by technology by a local government should start with a question of how is this being used to improve quality of life? How is it improving planning? How is it making affordable housing more available? How is it improving public space, etc.? And not really starting with the technology and thinking about how that can find an interesting use case. And then we also put forward two kind of fundamental principles here. One is the importance of considering human rights in all digital initiatives. And the other one, of course, what we're talking about here a lot is this local governments, cities and local governments should put in place programs and initiatives to overcome the digital divide. And there are lots of good examples from around the world. We also have a lot of material on our website. We have a number of what we call playbooks for local governments with practical tips on how to do this. We have some guides on digital rights. We've also done some work on AI with Shin and other colleagues, and more of that is coming out. And it's really, really heartening to see this kind of movement on people-centered smart cities moving forward. And here are, I guess one could call them five principles or five approaches. So empowering people, making access to technology equitable, managing digital infrastructure, building trust, and the importance of multi-stakeholder capacity. One really important thing to mention here is that in June this year at what's called the United Nations Habitat Assembly, it's like when all the member states of the UN come together to discuss issues of urbanization. They approved a resolution on people-centered smart cities, and what that does is that it requests UN Habitat to convene a global process, a global consultative process to develop what they're called international guidelines on people-centered smart cities. So this is kind of a global normative document that will guide the way that countries and cities will work with smart cities in the future. And we have 2 years to develop this. We're constituting an expert working group who will work for 2 years. There's a call out for expressions of interest. I can put it in the chat, and we also have a call out for cities to host expert group meetings on this topic. But this is really important for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pontus. I think we'll stay with you, and while we are moving to the second interactive part of this discussion. So we are asking to the audience, the different participants here. I mean, we have talked about the people-centered approach, and for you guys, it's also an opportunity to speak or to raise your hands after you share your comments. For you, what are, I mean, other approaches that we can consider to to address the issue? Do you think that the people-centered approach is a good approach? Do you think transparency is a good way? Do you think more participatory approach where we get citizens involved? If yes, how? I mean, just share any thoughts that you have on this aspect. And while you are doing that, I will go back to Ruth. I don't know if you have any comments or any thoughts to share or on this question of other approaches that can be explored.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the people-centered approach is a wonderful approach, and I think that is the way to go. But I think in conjunction with the people-centered approach, I think if governments can, and municipalities particularly, can employ specific metrics and keep track of these different inequalities relating to emerging technologies in urban settings, I think that is really, really imperative. I also think in general that we need to start addressing the unequal power dynamics that have been created with these big tech companies, because they also have a lot of power. And really, governments need to put pressure on them, but civil society too needs to be put pressure on them to be more ethical in the way that they are designing technology and using technology.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. Just to remind the audience, you can just scan the QR code to share your comments. I don't know if anyone here, any of the participants want to share a thoughts on this different approach that can be explored. Nana, maybe a second chance to speak. I don't know. Just raise your hand and I will turn your microphone on for you to be able to speak.
Well, if I may just step in also, since I already have my mic on. Thanks a lot to both of you for this amazing talk. I just want to highlight that in the case of using AI in cities, cities are facing sets of different challenges, and I won't go into them, but basically what we know and what we see is that the best way to tackle those challenges is to collaborate, right? So to have cities collaborate between each other, right? So we had different cities in Europe, for example, setting up open infrastructure, the algorithm register, for example, which creates more transparency towards the use of AI in cities, but also collaborate with communities, with the people, and with established local and international communities. And especially when we want to tackle inequalities surrounding marginalized groups and individuals, I think it's very important for cities to work together with representative of indigenous communities, representative of cultural minorities, of ethnic and religious minorities in cities, so to foster a more inclusive understanding and also a more inclusive implementation of AI in cities. So yeah, I mean, to sum up, I think collaboration between cities and communities, and between cities and the population, but also with universities and with the industry, is extremely useful in this context.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shane, for highlighting the aspect of collaboration, which is really a key, especially as we are, I mean, for a simple citizen or for someone like me, we are not really know what is inside an algorithm. So you have to evolve in an innovative way to make us aware of that issue. And then also, Nana, I will turn your mic on. I think now you're able to speak, so the floor is yours if you want to say something.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we are hearing you.
Oh, I'm happy. I felt odd since I couldn't have the team hear me. I'm very excited to be part of this meeting. Typically because I have a medical science background, but I grew up in the construction space, and it's introduced me more to design and like Pontus said, human-centered design. My little bit in terms of contribution to this particular session is with regards to the fact that it is a tabula rasa. That is where we all have to come to and decide. There is no development that is not targeted at the end user. The end user are humans, largely. And one major challenge that is coming up gradually has to do with lighting. We are thinking about technologies, how it is impacting our transportation, our education, everything. But there's a very subtle challenge that we may all not be able to realize. It has to do with what is called light pollution. We want to beautify the cities. We want to make sure we have beautiful lights that are monumental, but eventually the lights are also creating cancers. So there's something called photoentrainment, where you need a certain level of light as a human being to function properly with a circadian rhythm. Now the cities are being made smart. It is beautiful, but what are the potential impacts on the naive in society who have no interest in urban design, urban landscaping, nothing? So yes, the human-centered approach for me, I think it's one caption I can't forget as part of this meeting. It is where it's more of like the well where we all get our water from. You can go home and use it to cook. You can use it to bath. You can use it to wash your car, but it has to be that well we all start our discussion from. And I think thumbs up to Ruth and Pontus so far on their talk. I had 3 major concerns, but I think part of it has come up because I couldn't speak the first time, which is good eventually, you know. The first one has to do with privacy. So as much as we are looking at the good aspects of emerging technologies, yes, they are good. Privacy is the biggest challenge we all have. It has to do with the ethics of the use of the data we get, how we use the data we get, and how even the technology we claim is innovative impact our lives. I'm just coming from a neurotechnology conference in London. And trust you me, after the summit, I was like, wow, is the world ready? Because we are about to bridge the human and the technological phases together. Let's not talk about AI yet. We are all perplexed. But if I'm going to have a SIM card, maybe a microchip in your brain, and it is digital, all right, but it's not connected to your neural system, I think when AI joins, the cities are going to be human, you know. So basically, privacy becomes a big concern. Then the next bit on challenges that I wanted to add was the fact that no one seems to be talking about the African context of the challenges to, you know, urban inequalities. The politicians, the leaders. Leaders are often a big challenge because sometimes these technologies are good. They ensure transparency, accountability, but the politician is not interested because it exposes his own, you know, corrupt activity. I don't know if I made that point well. It is one major challenge. We can have all the discussions on this, but trust me, the technologies will not have the willpower to have them implemented, especially from the African perspective. I'll leave my other comments because
but maybe you can continue highlighting those interesting points in the chat, but we have to move on into the discussion. Thanks a lot, Nana, for your contribution. As you have mentioned the aspect of human approach, privacy, all those kind of really interesting things. We will now go with Pontus and then see some examples of how we get people involved, how we design citizen-centric technologies, and through the Flagship that he is leading. So Pontus, now let us know more about how, like, concretely on the field, what you guys are doing to to address this issue.
So I wanted to highlight here an example of how we've been. Oh, maybe this is Ruth first, is it?
Oh, I see. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, here's some pictures. No, so I wanted to highlight an example of a project that we've been running for quite a few years, which is called Block by Block. So we use Minecraft, the video game. I'm sure you all know it. It's by far in all of history the world's most popular video game. Tens, if maybe now hundreds of millions of players across the world, and we developed a methodology where we use Minecraft as a co-creation tool in urban planning and urban design projects. So we build neighborhoods, public spaces, streets, etc. in Minecraft, and then we run participatory processes where people are able to, or we teach people how to play Minecraft, and then they use the game to basically redesign their urban environment, and then present their ideas to decision makers, urban planners, mayors, etc. And it's really powerful when you give people a kind of easy to learn tool like Minecraft. You know, I've been in informal settlements all over Africa working with people who've never used a computer before, and within a couple of hours they've got used to the gameplay and they can actually start designing their urban environment. It's really easy to learn and really quick. And what you're doing through this technology is leveling the playing field between the professionals who have architectural training or urban planning training, etc., and people who were not spatially trained. And you facilitate a conversation between them. And I've seen it time and time again, this the kind of the power of using technology to enable people to have a more informed and equal conversation. In this project here, we can see the pictures. It's from a project that we did a few years ago in Johannesburg, central Johannesburg, redesigning a public space. And here we were playing around, I should say, with this emerging technology. So we used Unit a gaming platform, a 3D gaming platform, to create a bridge between Minecraft and an augmented reality platform. So if you just go back to the previous one, so in this picture here, you can see a bunch of, well, actually maybe stay on that one. So in the picture that we were just at, it's like a bunch of people who are basically redesigning this space you can see behind here in Minecraft, and then we're able to export those Minecraft designs into an augmented reality platform. So here you can see, it's a little bit difficult to see, but basically the idea is that you can see the 3D designs on the in the physical space itself. So you get this kind of physical, virtual, augmented kind of thing. It was really cool. My conclusion from this project, though, is that we are still quite a few years away from this kind of technology really working smoothly. But I think it's important that policymakers start thinking about this already now. What does this imply? Because essentially what you're doing is creating a kind of digital replica of the real world. And again, going back to my earlier comments about governance, who's going to set the rules around that virtual world, that physical digital world that is being created at the moment by a lot of big tech companies.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Ruth, maybe I had something to add on the different approaches that we could explore. So Ruth, before we close, you.
No, I think I already said most of this earlier. So just about in conjunction with the people-centered approach. I think the one thing I didn't touch on was a principle-driven approach, which is also an approach within government when adopting technologies to really understand the problem that the technology is trying to address, and not focus on a specific technology, but rather focus on what the technology is doing, because governments don't want to, technology is changing all the time, right? So it's better they don't buy into a specific technology, and rather focus on the principles behind the use of that technology. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, I want to. Sorry, if I can also intervene. I want to come back to this question of trust that one of the speakers mentioned earlier, and I think, I know that with COVID and the output of digital tracing, especially when we had to use these applications to to know if we were exposed to COVID, there was this question of trust that kind of arose a lot, because the question was should we provide this data, or should we install these applications onto our phones, and what would be the consequences of this, and would this kind of be opening the door towards kind of a large-scale global surveillance? And of course researchers came up with amazing solutions so to protect our privacy, right? So the system would work without having to share any personal information, and it was impossible basically in most cases, it was basically impossible to trace back the information towards the individuals. But still this kind of raised this question of digital trust, and should we trust the people who implement these systems, and should we trust the organization that develop these systems, and should also we trust the system itself? Are the systems reliable in that sense, right? And I kind of wonder, in the context of urban inequalities, if this question of trust is not key. When we try to build capacities, when we try to share technologies, when we try to implement new systems into the cities, what kind of trust should we expect from the population? What kind of trust should we expect from governments also towards tech corporations, for example? And the question I would have for Ruth and Pontus is there any way we can help building this trust, either towards the industry, either towards decision makers, either towards the technology itself? So I don't know if you have any leads on this, but this is something I'm really kind of wondering.
I could start if you like. So I think it was Mark Zuckerberg who said, "Move fast and break things," I think, and that's traditionally, I think, worked quite well within the tech industry in terms of scaling and moving very fast and growing a company. But I don't think that approach actually works very well in terms of building trust with the public. There's a researcher, I think he's at Emerson College, his name's Eric Gordon, and he's done a lot of research into civic engagement and the implementation of technology in cities and actually moving slower and creating sort of meaningful inefficiencies with the public through collaboration, collaborative processes, enabling the public to kind of understand what the technology is doing, involved in that process. I think that is one approach which could be used to actually develop trust, civic trust between people and municipalities and the implementation of new technology.
Maybe I can add another thing. I mean, really good points made. I think, again, if we go back to 2008 and Facebook and Zuckerberg, I think there was almost like a misunderstanding in the public sector that tech could just be left to the private sector. You know, all the money was there, all the techies were there. It was politically ideologically neutral. So let's just let the private sector build all this technology and then we can use it. No, without unquestioning somehow. And that's still, I think, among many policymakers, that's still the case, right? That thinking that tech is not for the public sector, it's for the private sector. We just leave it to them; they know best. And we need to change this around. So there is a need to take tech back to the public sector, and trust is really fundamental there. It's like there is this importance to build kind of democratic legitimacy and trust. You know, there is huge opportunities by using data, by using personal data. I mean, the example, Ruth, that you gave was fantastic, right? How data was being misused. But the AI also presents amazing opportunities to make that whole process of providing benefits to people and finding fraud and rooting out corruption, etc. You know, great opportunities to make that much more efficient. But we need to have the trust, and having the trust means I, as a resident, as a citizen, I need to feel that it's safe for me to give away or to provide my personal data to my local government or to my national government and feel safe that they're not going to outsource that to some unknown tech company, or there's going to be a security breach, or they're going to use it in a way that you described that happened in the Netherlands. And if we can build that trust, then the possibility of using this data to actually make, you know, government services better is huge.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Pontus. Yeah, we have a question in the chat from I hope I'm pronouncing well, Elia Youth. He or she asking, how can emerging technology be leveraged to design and manage urban spaces in a way that minimizes inequality and promotes exclusivity in the context of the developing world? Anyone has a thought on that? Or if you are here, you can just raise your hand and I will turn your micro on for you to elaborate more on that.
Maybe I can come in on this one. I think there's potential to use digital tech, and I think, you know, the examples of us using Minecraft through the block by block program, for example, I think is a good example. But I think there are many others about how to make it easier for communities to get involved in urban design or decisions that are being made about their neighborhoods or about their public spaces or issues to do with urban design, etc. I mean, there's some platforms like Decidim, for example, which has been used in Barcelona in a kind of crowdsourcing way. There's some NGOs that are working in the space. People Powered, for example, has done some research on different kind of digital public participation platforms. But I think human-centered design is really key in technology development, but also in urban design. And the more we can do to bring in the perspectives of people, of communities, and perhaps the most marginalized need extra focus, the better our urban spaces will be.
Oh, great. So I think we have reached the end of our session. So it was a pleasure to welcome all of you, the participants, and especially Pontus and Ruth. Thanks a lot for your different insights, thoughts, and projects, idea, case study, example that you have shared. It was very amazing. I learned a lot. I also enjoyed the discussion and the session. So I don't know if you have any final word to share before we close. Yeah, you're welcome.
Just thank you so much for having me here. It's been wonderful to have this discussion with all of you. And if you're interested in urban inequalities, reach out. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always interested to collaborate or just talk about urban inequalities. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a super interesting event. I really like the format. Great. Look forward to being a participant in the next one. Thank you.
Yashin, the final word before we close.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again, Ruth and Pontus, for being with us today. It was an amazing discussion. I'm quite happy about the result. This is the first episode, right, of this series of insights into that Leandri is organizing and managing. So I also want to thank Leandri, of course, for his amazing work in organizing this episode and this program of the UNESCO Chair. And finally, I also want to thank all the participants, the people who showed up. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us if you want to continue the discussion further. Thanks a lot.